Hello, everyone. How are we tonight?
Is the mic working?
Is it? Is it not?
It
Ooh,
is white. It's something.
that's okay.
Maybe it's
Oh wait, is it working now?
Yeah.
I think we got it. Well, while we get that volume situated, I wanted to go ahead and welcome everyone, both here in person and on the live stream. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight to celebrate the amazing book, Forget Prayers, Bring Cake. Merissa Nathan Gerson has created a story that I quite honestly don't think any of us really even thought before we saw the book itself. The question, how does one grieve alone? How does one grieve with no one at home to rub their back, to make dinner, even if it's just Kraft mac and cheese, to listen to you, and to overall just hold you up? So, Marissa is the person who says, okay, how do we get through that? How do we move past it? How do we find ourselves? And then the part of us that takes care of us. How do we figure out the best self-care? And so, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Merissa. And I know I said without further ado, but if you wanted to purchase a copy of her book tonight and you're watching from home, you'll have until 10 p.m. to do that purchase on Eventbrite. And now, without further ado, we can go ahead and bring on Merissa. Thank you.
Okay, so because we're in a theater that is also with food, it's extra important that when I give you me, you give me some of you, so that we can be in this together since it's a grief reading. I'm just going to put on a timer so I know what's up, and we're going to jump in. So I'm going to read to you a little bit from this book. And I'm here from New Orleans. I live in New Orleans. We've been through it. So this book is really prescient right now, as everyone is going through grief. I would say in the whole country, perhaps the whole world. And it's asking some of the questions that we are all asking about. How the heck do we do this? And looking at some intercultural relationships to grieving. So I'm going to just take you on a little trip, and then we'll do some Q&A at the end. And I hope you enjoy this journey into New Orleans with me. So we're going to start with the author's note. And I'm just going to pause. Okay, so I also just request if you're my mother and you're in the audience, no photos of me talking, so I can stay focused on the reading. All right, it's important that I can feel you. Okay, so here we go. Author, is it okay to take this off while I'm reading?
Yes, absolutely okay.
Okay. Let's start over. Hi. Can we all take a deep breath together? Okay. We can put our phones down until the end. Let's just all be here in this moment. No more pictures. We're going to do it, and I will take you on a trip. In fact, I think because of this moment, I'm going to sing to you because it's so scattered in this room. So I'm going to start with a song and we'll jump in. Don't worry, Mama, it'll be alright. No worry, sister, say your prayers and sleep tight, 'cause it'll be fine. Lover of mine, it'll be just fine. Author's note. She had reached the abandoned field, Kate Chopin, The Awakening. When I was 22, I worked the coffee house in Washington, D.C., at a coffee house, at Trist. Yeah, that's where I met Emily. The barista I worked with most often was my friend from Addis Ababa. He schooled me on how to bring in enough tips and taught me how to honor my food, count my blessings, and be a good waitress. We became close. One day he didn't cook well. I asked him what was wrong, and he told me his mother in Ethiopia had died that week and that her death was making him physically ill. Why, I asked. I didn't understand yet. Because, he told me, in my country, we scream. In my country, I would yell and let this feeling out of me. I need to scream. I need to wail, but if I wail and scream here, the police are going to come. I cannot release this pain, so I am sick. We need to wail. We need to scream. And if we can't, we need to find some way to siphon out the pain, because grief is everywhere. It is in our coffee, poured by those who have suffered recent losses. It is on the news and in the subtext of our friends' Instagram feeds. Grief is as ever-present as sexuality, and it too requires a release, an orgasm for mourning, a pouring out of that which is contained in the body, ignored, and not attended to. We are, as a culture, chronically grief-ridden. The question is how to grieve, how to feel, how to mourn without blasting to smithereens. I'm going to just dance through this book with you all. So chapter 1, Home Alone, what do I need? How do I even know? Do you think she was losing her breath or catching it? I think she was catching it. Selah Satterstrom, the Pink Institution. The biggest commitment I ever made was not to a person, but to a house. In May of 2019, I fell deeply in love with the 100-year-old purple and yellow double shotgun conversion in mid-city New Orleans, flanked by loquat, kumquat, lemon, and grapefruit trees, jasmine and trumpet flowers. It was love at first sight. In the midst of tornado warnings and flash floods, my 6'4" husky, larger-than-life father Alan accompanied me to New Orleans at the drop of a hat to see the property. The house had been lovingly tended for 45 years by an academic couple. My father and I became very close because he discovered I needed a change. The last thing he did in his life was help me set up a home base. We were both a bit desperate for me to find my place in the world. There were loud emergency weather sirens when we arrived in New Orleans, and all of the cars were parked up on the medians. The car rental agency called us to make sure we moved our rental to higher ground so that it wouldn't float away. I revered the resilience of this post-apocalyptic land. Nearly every electric line, every store, every restaurant, every home we encountered was a feat of Katrina levee breaks survival. I'm just going to keep fast forwarding because that's how I want to do this right now. So what happens is I moved to New Orleans. And then a week later, my father started to fall over and couldn't stand up. And then 2 months later, he died. And I had just left all my friends, all my comfort zones, everything that made me sane, everything that helped me get through. And I was taking the biggest leap of my life, and suddenly it was like, and here you are, young lady, alone in a crazy city, and with a dead dad. And so this book is sort of about all the things I used to get through that. So I'm going to just fast forward to a Mardi Gras scene, which is my favorite stuff to read about. So we'll read 2 Mardi Gras scenes, 1 hurricane, and call it a New Orleans day. How does that sound? So chapter 8, Hello, is this over yet? So he passed away, this is afterwards. This is life after death, the second part of the book. To designate a hell is not, of course, to tell us anything about how to extract people from that hell, how to moderate hell's flames. Come February, just 2 months after my father died, I was gearing up for my first Mardi Gras. I had a new job. I had an old wedding dress my father bought me for $25 as a joke years earlier when a bridal shop went out of business. I spent my evenings after work painting it, deconstructing it, gluing it, and stitching beads to make this my Mardi Gras costume. Leading up to Fat Tuesday, I wrestled with contradicting beliefs within myself. My religion told me to pause the party, to stop for this time of Avelut, of mourning, to avoid dancing, joy, and the like. 1 year, this time allowance belongs to the stricter realms of Jewish tradition. 1 year away from the regular joys of the world when a parent dies, and then you return. I remember my uncle telling me how some of his patients needed a year of sleep to recover from certain things. I remember a Jewish agricultural concept of the Shemitah year, after 6 years of growth, taking a 7th year to leave the field arid, to leave the field quiet, to let it find its regeneration. The idea of a year off, of a year to pause, of a year for mourning in which I would participate wholly differently in life was hard for me to submit to. On a Friday, I joined my crew of Dystopian Paradise, for a pre-Mardi Gras parade called La Boheme, wearing a velour onesie, sparkly leggings, a decked-out hot pink blazer, and hiking boots. When we began to ride through crowds for 2 miles, essentially a slow, boisterous walk, dance, bike ride, float, moving through roaring throngs of people, from the Bywater through the Marigny to the French Quarter, I was both happy and bewildered, both excited and exhausted. I felt like a minor celebrity dance star and at once aware of these haunted, unlit corners of New Orleans streets. I said I was happy. My body was flailing in celebration, but inside I had the sense that my knowledge of death was shadowing my walk through the city. I was half there, pushing into joy with all my might, while another part of me wholly resisted. I felt guilty for parading, guilty for dancing, guilty for getting up and going when I was taught otherwise. I wasn't afraid of God per se, but I was worried about consequences. Perhaps for me, as someone new to New Orleans, drinking and frolicking was more dangerous when one leg was so close to the grave. I felt a pop in my left knee. I kept on keeping on. And then as we got about 2 feet away from the French Quarter, I felt this burst of excited energy in my legs, leapt into the air, and I landed in some strange squat of a dance move, screamed, and fell into the onlooking crowd. Lovely. I partially tore my ACL and flipped my meniscus, causing a massive bucket tear. Yeah, this was not my time to dance. To everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose, right? A time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up that which is planted, okay. And of course, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance. I rode the St. Anne's Mardi Gras Day Parade in my deconstructed wedding dress, on a bike taxi, led in an ankle-to-thigh brace, crutches hanging over the edge. And my body took me to a sofa for the months to come. Whether I liked it or not, this was going to have to be my time to mourn. And what happens if you move to New Orleans? Some people who get there know everything already. There's no one who ever moves to New Orleans who doesn't get bit by the city in some way. And it'll force you to know things that you don't already know. And for me, as a white woman moving from Washington, my knowledge of American history was there, but my deep understanding of how real slavery was in New Orleans and how real the selling of human lives was and has stained us was not something I understood. So grief became much bigger than just about me. It became about the communities left behind. It became about what do we do with heavy history? What do we do with moving forward? What do we do with teaching our children? So New Orleans sort of dosed me in a reality that I wasn't avoiding, I was searching to understand. So I'm going to read you a little bit about what happens in hurricane season to give you a vista into the psyche of a New Orleanian, which I am not really, I'm a transplant. Chapter 10, Compounded Grief, Fire and Brimstone. She was closed up like a fist. It was her very own memory, not theirs. Her very own real and terrible and dark memory. Gail Jones, Corregidora. What is it to pick up the pieces and to live in this very place of devastation? Vina Das, Life in Words, Violence and Descent into the Ordinary. Come August, 9 months after the death of my father, after zigzagging between my family and my own life in New Orleans, Louisiana became home. I fell in love with the bayou at sunset, with the willows in City Park, with the blooming magnolias, and the way the air smelled like a Caribbean island early in the morning. I felt the ocean even though I could not see it. And with August came hurricane season, and it triples this year. This is last year. This year's a whole story. Used to preparing for nor'easters when I lived in New England, I was an old hat at prepping for inclement weather and winds over 65 miles per hour. I knew to fill the bathtub with water, prepare non-perishables, charge extra phone chargers, and be certain flashlights had batteries. When I lived in California, I had a similar practice preparing for earthquakes and kept a bag by my bed with money, boots, a first aid kit, and a flashlight ready to go in an emergency. Although secretly, I don't think I actually did that. I think I was supposed to do that, and I was never ready. And so when the hurricane warning came in, I took cues from my neighbors, most of whom had lived on this block for almost 45 years. A woman from my Mardi Gras crew sent me a hurricane prep guide. I bought things online to prepare. And then the neighbors emerged with more advice. The sky was ominous before storms. The air still. One neighbor across the street had survived Hurricane Betsy and Hurricane Katrina. Her nerves were rattled, and she told me she was scared. I watched her pacing the block in slippers, awaiting the worst. She wanted me, she said, to have an escape route. I was raised on escape routes. We watched the news in my house religiously. On the nights I tried to get my dad to switch it off, he would turn to me doing stretches on the floor while watching and always say the same thing. How will you know when it's time to go? He reminded me that our family survived because my grandfather had read Hitler's Mein Kampf, because he knew the worst was coming. We watched the news in our house to prepare for the worst to come. And I always knew where to go to hide in case I had to. I was raised being prepared to run. But New Orleans, as any old hat New Orleanian knows, is not your average terrain. I let my neighbor know that I had called an old friend in Ocean Springs, Mississippi, her mother offering a room on a retreat center property. My neighbor told me this was a terrible idea, that my escape plan was exactly in the storm's path. Another neighbor, a former prison guard who lived 2 doors down, told me she escaped storms by getting a room in the French Quarter. Our generators kept the electricity on, and she was safe. This time I had a new plan, and I let her know. I had booked a discounted hotel room in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, an hour and a half inland and north. She laughed. Not there. That storm is going north. Apparently every plan I was making was putting me in more danger. Now I felt scared. I felt alone. I felt confused by how people did this, and a bit self-pitying for doing it without a partner or even a housemate. If the storm came, would anyone notice me? Same questions happened a month ago. The news hadn't reached a national audience yet. This massive confluence of not one but 3 storms aiming straight for New Orleans. I was taking cues from other people's fears, from other people's experience. Another neighbor told me to get gas, to fill my car, to be ready to go. And what's interesting is that it's so strange reading it right now, just because I haven't read it since this hurricane. But that was a year ago, and I didn't realize how true it was. Like, you need your gas if you can get it. If you can get it is the most important part, though. What I noticed as we prepared is I learned who on the block had a generator, what a good emergency plan was, how to take in my plants, and anything that could turn into a projectile, was that some people were going into terrible nervous states, and others appeared fine. Some were terrified, and others were calm. Some showed fear, some hid it, some expressed it through shutting down, others through speeding up, staying in go mode. Some had yesterday echoing with today, and others were not affected by the past because they did not carry the story, because they were new to New Orleans. When I moved to New Orleans, I was terrified of what I knew of the Superdome in 2005. On arrival, I remember my chiropractor looking at me like I was crazy when I shared this fear with him. It had been 15 years since Hurricane Katrina, and the Superdome wasn't used for sports and balls and gatherings of all kinds. In so many ways, the city had moved on. But come storm season, my friends who had lived through Katrina were rattled, nervous, hyper alert, experiencing extreme anxiety and PTSD, ready for the worst, and riddled with memories of the past. Fear of floods were the tip of their worries, fears of being forgotten, of being rendered invisible, of being helpless, of rights being stripped, of insurance companies going AWOL. These were fortified by memories that just in their arrival were destabilizing. I found myself empathizing with everyone I encountered, and I found myself missing my father. I wanted to call him, to tell him of the mayhem. I also wanted to tell him how much these stories haunted me, echoed with stories I listened to from my own grandparents, of governments forgetting them, of displacement, of finding family photos in the debris of life and holding on to them like treasures, of being labeled refugees in the very place they call home. I wanted my dad, but I also wanted this thing he and only he could offer me, the act of remembering something together, even if that something happened before I was born. I wanted to talk to someone who had my father's depth of knowledge concerning the violent history that preceded me. I was gripped by the realization that everything was gone with him. I'm going to fast forward, I want to read forward that. Moving forward. I grieved during hurricane season for my neighbors and friends and their memories of a city underwater, forgotten. I grieve for my absent father and for the way many stories of our history died with him. I grieve for my own family's plight in Eastern Europe, and I grieve for what I learned of bodies left in the streets of New Orleans, as if a government had no obligation to pay homage to these people who worked, lived, and served the city. I grieved that horrific history was being repeated in many new ways for so many, right here, right now. You have your own story. You may have your own daily battles with microaggressions that echo history. You most likely have your own heavy past that makes this present moment louder, harder, and more complicated. Part of inheriting trauma can be to normalize suffering, to act like it's just fine to live with severe anxiety and pain. Notice these otherwise accepted elements of life. Mark them as pivot points, places where grief needs tending and wounds need healing. Even if that tending and healing can't come for a decade or even a lifetime, the act of labeling history and harm is a step in the right direction. When symptoms arise out of the blue, when history gets loud, this is a simple time to admit the past is not yet laid to rest, especially when a story erased is real and has real impacts on this lived moment. It is said that those who heal their generation heal 7 generations back and 7 generations forward. Begin with writing the story down. Begin with seeing how heavy this load may be. Begin with you. I'm going to fast forward to the end. Right. I'm just checking my time. Perfect. So most of the book gets into what grief looks like and how you want to, you want to punch a wall, you want to punch a tree, you can't find help, you feel isolated. All the symptoms of grief are in here. But I just don't feel like it today, getting really deeply into the sad stuff. So I'm gonna take you to the joy. Is everyone comfortable with kind of joy now?
Yes.
What? Everyone
Yes.
comfortable? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. Here we go. This is the end of the book. Spoiler. My mid-city block was once shrouded in darkness. No electricity for months on end. And let me just add, I'm just taking a moment to just say, this just happened again. New Orleans was without electricity. My Terminex guy who came to get rid of the procreating rats in my attic has informed me that he had 22 days without electricity in the city he calls home. And that Terminex wouldn't pay that during that time. And so this just happened again. And it's not the same. There's not flooding. There's not nearly as bad as Katrina in terms of but there's a lot of New Orleans and the surrounding parishes, especially the surrounding parishes that are still without electricity, without food, so it's a really terrifying thing. So this isn't hypothetical. So we can say once, like 2 weeks ago. And my students, the Tulane, I teach at Tulane, my students got stuck there, half of them, because the school didn't evacuate. They sort of messed up a little. Oh, sorry, Tulane's perfect. The students did not get evacuated and then had to be driven. I mean, they lived through a pretty terrifying thing for the kids that are supposed to be sheltered, so it's complicated. So here we go. My mid-city block was once shrouded in darkness. No electricity for months on end, at least 4 feet of water in the homes, debris, mold, and a total lack of infrastructure everywhere, like when 911 stopped functioning a month ago completely. And that's some things we don't think about if you have a physical emergency. And in flood zone X, my block, though in some places under 10 feet of water, was a lucky block, a spared block. Nearby, when buying a fried catfish po' boy, not kosher, I know at Katie's in Iberville, I always make a note of a subtle plaque by the front door reading Water Line Katrina 2005. The plaque is at roughly 7 feet. Mandina's up the street, Finn McCool's, and so many other neighborhood restaurants and bars are resurrections from the debris. So many businesses, houses, street poles and signs, schools and churches in this neighborhood had to navigate being stripped of everything, and then so many returned. There are scars. Don't forget the scars remain, permanent scars, lives lost, displaced, and ruined. This house, this city where I have made a home but will always be a guest on sacred Chittimacha land, this house, these 100-year-old flood-surviving wooden floors I bow to. I am in awe of this place. I am in awe of the will to survive, the way cultural practices live on, how second lines and Mardi Gras Indians and everything on Claiborne and beyond continues with fervor. There is a reason why people come here when they need to remember their vitality. This is New Orleans, an emblem of strength and perseverance. If New Orleans, the most miraculous, resilient, and remarkable city on earth, could keep its joy, magnify its joy, share its joy, bring others to joy, then so can you. I have a hunch you will find your new normal every time. There we go. So now we're at Mardi Gras. In the spirit of New Orleans, a borrowed method, we ride through the city. This is Mardi Gras a year and a half later when I'm ready to go. Inviting anyone willing to witness our joy to participate. There are no limits to this one. Express yourself is blasting. People rush to their porches. This is like finding the ice cream man on your block times 10. This is contagious communal joy. Better than sex. Just a group of adults remembering to play, remembering to enjoy the delight of personal transformation, putting their creativity on full peacock display for all to relish. This is a group of adults dosing a city in joy. People rush outside and scream. Happy Mardi Gras. Everyone wants in. Everyone wants a release. Children leap and run beside us like puppies. It's safe. It's at a distance. It's gentle and yet loud. And there are prizes. The crew of goddesses will parade and hand out the delicacies of gilded oyster shells. The crew of muses emerge, their shoes decked out. It's an endless unfolding, as if everyone in one single place wants to remind you that you aren't alone, that you can join the fray, that collectively we have this acute capacity for a good time. It's a kid's birthday party times 1,000, and everyone leaves with beads, with goodies, with prizes and smiles, and there's cake. Did I mention cake? There is so much cake. Praline, chantilly cream, frangipan, cream cheese, frosted, goat cheese and apple, cream cheese and cinnamon, Radical Joy's confetti cake, Randazzo's traditional. There's king cake, Pop-Tarts, Saba's vodka king cake, Megazzo's Gambinos, Brennan's pink parade, strawberry cream cheese. There's the Elvis from La Boulangerie with peanut butter, banana, toasted chocolate, marshmallows, and bacon. Walnut frangipan with apple cider vinegar glaze and cream cheese frosting from Bayou St. Cake, Azul Dulce blueberry from Bywater Bakery, Galette de Raw from Bearcat, and the favorite Dong Fong strawberry from New Orleans East. I had wailed. I had beaten my chest. I had torn at my hair and tossed myself towards the grave. I mourned. I was the bereaved. I grieved. I lamented. I lay down flat, kissing the earth. And as is the way, joy did, in fact, return. My father did not. They who sow in tears will reap with songs of joy. I grew up hearing the expression, never forget. My father even wrote it as an epitaph to a 7th grade research paper. It's about remembering the horror of what happened to our family, and I will add, maybe yours. Rabbi Simcha Zissel Zib, the 19th century Musar rabbi, says, remembering death in the proper way can bring a person to the ultimate joy. My additional caveat to the family mantra after all these years of learning comes from the Hasidic mystical worship of delight. Never forget joy. Never forget that the pain you feel in mourning is in part because of how deeply you love someone, something, some time, some state of being. Celebrate that love, never forget it, and then dance. So I think we have time now for some question and answer. And I'm just going to step out of the light for just a second. So thanks all for being here. It's really nice. Anybody have any questions? Yes.
I just have a comment. I listen to a lot of book talks. That's what we do. This was one of the best ones.
Oh, thanks.
Not only is your writing beautiful, but your reading is equally as good.
Oh, thank you so much.
Really? Is the book on tape?
Almost. Ooh, I'm having trouble with it, yes. Tomorrow I'm supposed to send it to the master, like the sound master guy. I'm reading it, yes.
It's absolutely beautiful.
I produced it in New Orleans at a sound studio called Esplanade Studios where Solange does her album.
It's beautiful. It's very touching, very moving, very personal. It's your voice. It's a fantastic book.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any other questions? Any other, I can also read more. I can do whatever you want. I'm here for all of you right now. Any questions about grieving?
So we've got some questions from online.
Oh yeah, bring it. I'm ready.
All right. And I know you said that you wanted to move away from the sadness.
No, I don't need to. I wrote a book about grief, so I'm like all about the sadness.
Honestly, great, because we're get into the nitty-gritty of it.
Perfect.
So, when moving, you're the one that brings your history with you to share the new connections you made. Did you find yourself at all hesitant at first to talk about your father with those who didn't know him?
Yeah. I'm still hesitant. It feels very sacred to talk about a dead person. So even at my, I did memorials, outdoor memorials, because COVID came while I was grieving. And even then, I felt really weird saying, let's celebrate his life, because they didn't know him. So what I did find, though, in New Orleans that I didn't, it wasn't like, oh, remember my dad, and no one did. I was in a place where no one knew him. But what I did get was that everyone around me knew death in a way that most people don't, and that they've been engaging death. I didn't read it, but I could read you a little bit from if I can find it fast enough, but, the second line, here, I just opened to it actually organically. So if you don't know what a second line is, we'll get to it right now. So the night I learned he was fatally ill, I was invited through friends and friends to the Irish Channel for a weekly red beans and rice dinner gathering. I knew no one. In an unfamiliar living room plastered with photos of local parades and filled with people, performers, academics, waitresses, and writers, I was a mess. I couldn't put my phone down, a faux pas at a community dinner. I was getting texts from home. Fast forward. Classic New Orleans, the second line originated as a funerary ritual of the African American community. That's where I found out about this at dinner. That has been adopted by the city at large over the years. Beginning with the jazz funeral, a band plays a slow dirge leading to a burial, setting a tone of deep mourning and sadness. The second line follows. Derived from a combination of West African, Haitian, Creole, and American influences, a second line becomes a transition from sadness to joy, from absence to the celebration of a life and its ascent. After giving into grief and deep mourning, the slow hymns and the dirges, the funeral and the burial, the band ups the tempo and launches into boisterous celebration. What was once a funeral becomes a celebratory parade where attendees display dance moves in the second line, trailing the band. People gather from all directions, many dressed in colors coded to their community, some riding low-slung motorbikes. And so part of what happened was that I had to go to the airport a lot, and I didn't have friends to drive me, so I took an Uber. I would always get an Uber, whatever, Lyft, whatever's allowed, to the airport. And the cab drivers in New Orleans were actually the people I found giving me the most love about me. They'd be like, "Why are you going home?" I said, "My dad's dying." And it was like not even a beat was skipped. Like the presence of empathy was so much more profound than anywhere I've ever lived. And then knowing that my neighbors had reconstructed their lives or witnessed, some people have witnessed murder, some people have witnessed drownings and all kinds of things. There was this sense that like my neighborhood, I didn't tell them who my dad was, but they took care of me immediately. Like my neighbor across the street, they found me like crying in the street one day, just getting out of my car, and I told them, I don't know what's going on, I just got here with my dad, it seems like he's dying. And they just started, my alarm code is like somebody's phone number, like they all just started taking care of me. And coming into the house when I was, like I just gave the keys, and people hung my, I just moved in, they hung my light fixtures, they took in my mail, they watered my plants. So I didn't need to tell people who my dad was to get the love, but honoring his life and his magnitude is sort of a DC thing for me where people know him already. But the pain that I was carrying, it felt like the city could smell it and love it and be there for me in a way that I don't think would have been the same elsewhere. Yeah.
I put so much emotion and so much feelings. I just walked in and I'm in tears, honestly. If you don't mind, will you talk a little bit about your relationship with your father? Was it admiration? Was it friendship? Or was it everything? Do you mind if you talk about it a bit?
Well, I was just talking today with my cousin about this, that when my dad was dying, I got, he and I had a contentious, so we were both very close and both at war. He wasn't an easy guy, and I'm not an easy gal. And so we had a lot of yelling, a lot of fighting, and a lot of love, all of it. And when he was dying, I said, "Dad, it's like really hard right now because I'm like, I see all of you, and I'm like, there's part of you that I don't like, but I really love you. Like I just want to be with you. I love you. And what you're teaching me is what it means to be a human." And he said, "No, I'm not." He said, "I'm teaching you what it means to be a Gerson." And so for me, like the wide range of feeling is something I was like sort of born into a life where it was very important to have a lot of feeling, at least for me. And yeah, so he himself, like writing about him, I loved him, I hated him, I enjoyed him, I thought he was so annoying. So the whole range of feeling, just engaging with my father's memories, innately part of it, I would say. If he had been a boring, quiet, like some other guy, it would have been harder to write his book. But in a lot of ways, like the vibrancy, I think you've met my father, and he was the most exciting person in the room, and also sometimes the scariest. So it's in the book, I think, his spirit. Yeah. Any questions?
So this is more of a comment from me.
Yeah.
So you mentioned a lot about like your Jewish heritage, and I almost like hearing about your neighbors in New Orleans. It's almost like a New Orleans Shiva, but without the coverage of the community coming together to take care of you.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say that. And my neighbors aren't Jewish. Like I have one neighbor, like 6 doors down, he's got a funny job. His job is to go to film. They make a lot of movies in New Orleans. So his job is to go and make a movie and take photographs of them making movies. That's what he does. But I saw him once in synagogue. So in order to have a shiva, so for those that don't know, it's all in the book. The Jewish mourning ritual is like pretty basic. It's not basic, but it's easy to lay it out. So when someone dies, you're supposed to bury them as soon as possible, within 7 days. And we do burial in the earth, and it's nothing fancy, no open casket. And then starting the day that they're underground, you have 7 days called Shiva, where you sit and you're taken care of, and people visit you and bring you food and you pray. And then you have 30 days, which is Shloshim, which means 30, where you're also sort of in this limbo state, psychologically and spiritually. And then after that, you're supposed to go back to work and rejoin the living, theoretically. I mean, most people just go back to work. And then you have an 11-month period after that burial day where you say a prayer every single day, 3 times a day. Theoretically, I couldn't handle it. But and that's the ritual. And then you finish a grave ceremony. And what's my point? Oh yeah, so I had a shiva at my house, and it was sort of fun at first. Now it's not as fun because we don't gather the same way we once did. But I gathered any Jew I've met in New Orleans because you have to have 10 people to say the prayer, and I didn't know that many. So 8 people came, and then a 9th came, and we were like, what do we do? So my friend ran down the street to this guy's house, and we knocked on this, and we were like, we need you. And in some ways, that ritual was it was the most wonderful moment for me of all, because I was grateful that was a mandate. Like if I didn't need 10 people, I wouldn't have brought more community in. So first there was that, but also like my rituals, I really enjoyed writing this book because I had to translate Jewish ritual for everyone, because I'm very much into everyone understanding each other. And the Jewish rituals have been very useful, and a lot of cultures have similar ones. And like there's something called 9 Nights ceremony in Ghana, and there's all kinds of different ceremonies. So but in my neighborhood, I just noticed like these moments where strangers became like people that the love was so cool in a weird way. Like there was a woman in a wheelchair that was like an electric wheelchair, and she would always come by and just say, I'm praying for your daddy. And I was like, I don't know you, but it was nice. It was really nice. And people had these moments where someone got my mail, and I had this poster come from someone in LA, and he held onto it for weeks because I was home with the funeral. And he came to my door, and his face looked, he's like, just want you to know, I know you. And it was nice. Like I didn't have to say, are you Jewish? Can you come be in our 10-person prayer? And I liked these moments that were some were insider and some weren't, but everywhere there was care. I don't know if I felt that way like 11 months in, or like even 7 months in, but for the first couple months, there was a lot of that. And then I just, as everyone does when they're grieving, I was just like, nobody's out there. And that's when, I just want to add, I think someone asked something similar about telling my dad's story. That's when I started going to grief groups. And I talk about that in the book, but hospices offer free grief groups, and you don't have to have someone in hospice. The Dinner Party is an organization that I did not seek, that like weirdly found me, and I would go to parties where you would literally just, the only rule was you can talk about death, versus most parties where you really can't. And it felt, and everyone had someone that had recently died, and we just hung out, but then we'd say like, oh yeah, when I went to the grave last week, it was really hard. And I loved listening because I was like, oh, I didn't know anyone else was dealing with going to the grave. It sucks, and it also it's kind of exciting, and I don't know. So it was nice to hear them, what they did, and the different rituals, and it was always intercultural. And so there's a lot of ways in which I got to talk about my dad there, but never was anything expected. Like there is no, I think, like even New Orleans now, after this storm, we're all grieving. I mean, we all had a window into what it would look like if your life was taken away, as you know it. And some people's were. Some people had their houses burned down. I mean, if you drive through New Orleans, there's houses collapsed everywhere. It's pretty scary still. But for those of us that are like living sort of on a privileged lily pad, it's a scary thing to say, oh my God, I might have to just leave everything I thought was permanent. And that's similar to when someone dies and you have to say goodbye to, oh, I thought they were going to be here for breakfast tomorrow, and they're not. And learning how to live with that, I think, is part of us just finding new places in ourselves. And grief isn't just about a punch in the gut. It's also about a spiritual reorganization of an individual. And it's a literal reorientation with the world. And everyone, whether they like it or not, comes out of that with a new part of themselves. It's just not, it's not fun. Yeah.
I don't even. Well, I want to say that because I just lost my dad in August of this month to COVID, and I just wanted some type of advice. Sorry, y'all.
No, don't be sorry. Take a breath. We're grateful that you're sharing.
That's that you're very strong. I know, certain days you might not be. So, what type of advice would you have for someone that's how to be strong for their mom and stuff?
Oh yeah. Okay, why don't we read from the book about it? Don't be sorry, you're alive. That's what it means. We're just going to go to page 44, setting up your grief support. So one of the things about going through it is that we aren't taught that you are the center of the world, right? Like without you in your world, there's nobody in your world. I don't think. I mean, we don't know where you go if you don't go, but right. So this is just a list of options for anybody. Just like setting up your grief support, just like you might leave a list of care guidelines and emergency numbers for a babysitter, a friend, or parent watching your child, make that list for you. So you remember how to care for yourself in an emergency. Things to do that are almost free. List and notify trusted friends about what you're going through. Identify trusting and available friends, write their names down. List, and this is advice to myself. I was recently, during that storm, I kind of like lost it a bit, and I realized I wasn't taking any of my own advice. I was like, they're all done with me. I'm done. They've heard from me enough, but people want to know that you need them. List and notify trusted family, chosen or otherwise. Identify and write them down. Have an emergency contact in case you really panic. This is how you support your mom, is by taking care of you. So that in case you really panic, pick one. Write the name and number down. Your contact can be a parent, friend, therapist, counselor, AA sponsor. Have this name on hand. It will make you feel better and less lonely in a crisis, knowing you're ready with the number. Like I think having a list in your phone of all this on one note. Honor your body. When something is too much, as signaled by anxiety or nausea or pain or worry, walk away if you can. Stop reading, shut the screen, and respect your own boundaries so that you have reserves for what matters most. And forgive yourself for the times you can't. Jobs force many into ignoring feelings. And phone and screen obsession are typical in times of distress. I don't know why I added that. You will want your phone. Get touched. Have a lover, a nice friend, a roommate. Ask for a hug. Ask for a foot rub. Ask for them to brush your hair. Whatever. Just ask for some eye contact and some non-sexual care to ground you. There is nothing wrong with getting yourself a giant stuffed animal, no one to touch you. Consider a 15-minute chair massage at a salon for $15. Let a stranger rub your neck or feet. It can help. And then I just instead of reading all, I'll just read the highlights. Bathe, like take care of your body, like you know all this, I have a feeling. But like, put oils and treat yourself like you're a queen as much as you can. Cry as much as you can. Get it all out of you if you can. Eat protein and greens, which sounds so, this is like coming from the woman who's literally eaten more than 20 cakes in the past month. And I'm not exaggerating. I'm going to sample the whole country's cakes. We're about to shift modes. But just in order to calm your nervous system. So maybe paying attention to what you put in your body when you're supporting someone else. Because I know for me, it's like the more sugar, the bitchier I get. And sorry, Mom. And then, but it's really great to give yourself the food that gives you nourishment. And then it sounds so dumb, but drinking more water. Like if you're caring for someone else, just drinking the water because your adrenals are all like up by the anxiety, and it'll flush some of that out of you. And then if you take vitamins, sleep, just more sleep when you can, as much as you can. Many people can't, and there's a whole chapter on sleep in bed. Read that chapter. But let your body metabolize. Like we need to do something. Like if you've ever gone to yoga, if you've ever gone to co-opted Indian tradition yoga. So we do that. And then you go to Shavasana. When you're lying down in Shavasana, you're just integrating what you've done. And death isn't just terrible. I mean, all of you know who've been through it. There's also magic and witness and like this remarkable element of connection. But we have to metabolize that. It doesn't just go nowhere. We have to take a breath to be like, what just happened, right? Watch your negative self-talk. So when you're like, you suck for being tired, or you're a jerk for eating so much cake, tired is reasonable, pie is comforting, cake is comforting, just be kind to yourself as much as you can. And also, if you're always talking smack in your head to yourself, it can be a signal that you're more traumatized than you realize. So it could be a call for care. And then the other thing is identifying a grief navigator. Someone, it could be a priest, a rabbi, a chaplain, a monk, a hospice counselor, a grandmother who's been through it, a friend who's been through it, Andy Shalal, whoever, you just go. So that's important to just make sure you know that there's someone who knows more than you, because sometimes we get deep in the water and we're like, oh, I have no idea what's in there, and somebody else might be really good with their scuba gear, And then swimming, it sounds so weird, but if you have a bathtub, just lie in it, or go to put your toes in Rock Creek Park, but not for too long in case there's chemicals. And then the last thing is just don't pretend it's fine if it gets to a place where it isn't. For some of you, pretending it is fine is a survival tactic that cannot be forfeited. Don't judge that. I'm not judging that, but be sure when this occurs, be conscious of it, and inch towards finding support in whatever way is available to you. Grandma, friend, coworker, therapist, hairstylist, whomever. Grief is horrifying. You're most likely going to need a leg up. Does that answer it? There's way more in here. The whole book is about, the whole entire book is like, how do you give love when you feel like you're empty? So I think the answer is love you, which I hate that expression, but any last questions? Yeah, and that's Monique and then the gentleman behind you.
I'm so sorry you lost your dad.
Me too.
I lost my dad in June, and it's just a struggle. Thankfully, I found this book. The universe brought it to me exactly when I needed it. So I think you, having written this with such care, I think you know how important the book is. But I just want you to know that for me, it has been a life raft. And I'm curious about your writing process, and not like where you wrote, but one, why is it a guide? How did you take care of yourself while you were writing it? What got you to the path of creating this beautiful work of art?
First of all, thank you. Monique's my biggest fan.
I stalk her on Instagram.
It makes me, whenever I'm having a bad day, a message from her appears, I'm like, oh, okay. Thank you. I'm grateful for you. I'm really glad you're here. Writing the book was really terrible, to be honest. It was the most brutal thing I think I've ever done in my life, and it was also one of the most gratifying. It came close, I think it almost took me. But the way I got through it was one, you. I wrote it for you, so that got me through writing. And then two, I wrote it for me. I was really annoyed when I was reading. I was mad at everybody. I was like, why is everyone scared of death? Why is everyone that talks to me can't listen to what I'm saying because they're scared of what I'm saying? I wanted people not to be scared anymore. So badly. I wanted them not to be scared. So part of it was that, and then part of it was I didn't have a guide that I could really rely on. There's lots of grief books, but this was the book I wanted. So I was writing it for you and for me. And then the process of writing it, I have really great insurance at Thule, which I'm so grateful for. And I'm scared to even be grateful because I didn't want to go away ever. But I just upped my therapy. I started going twice a week. And I also, when it was really traumatized, I used to do trauma work. And so I would go to crowds and speak about trauma. And I learned over time that if I came home after working on trauma with others and didn't do something to clear it, conflict inevitably would follow me. So I would literally, even if I didn't do anything, fights would come. It was like I had a magnet for fighting. So I remember coming back from giving a talk in Seattle once, and I was trying to rest, and a friend came up, and she ended up yelling at me. I know when I'm bad. I wasn't bad that day. So I used the tools I learned with that, which were when my nervous, I'm very good at observing me, almost maybe too good. So my nervous system got out of whack. I would go to an acupuncture. I would pay for help to bring me back, or I would take a bath, or I would go to the woods, and a lot of it was relying. My mom's back there, and a lot was calling. I needed someone I could cry to when it was just terrifying, because I went to the funeral Like I was telling her today, the only parts I really never read are the part in the book where he dies. I got loud on the part where I bury him. And writing that it really almost took me. Like it took my life out for days. And so the process was loving. Like my mom actually started getting me, it sounds so dumb, but it was useful, a CSA. So she sent me local Louisiana farmer, like vegetables once, and I'm not good at cooking at all, but even just seeing them there, it really helped me. So just upping my own care was mandated in that time, even though I was sort of taking myself to the edge. Thanks for your question, and for you. Yes, sir.
I just have a comment about the psyche of people I met in New Orleans. I've never been there,
Yeah.
unfortunately, but I've met about 4 or 5 people. I've never met friendly people in my life. It's just something about.
You said a what? Friendlier?
I've never met what I call regular, friendlier people than the individuals I know that are from New Orleans. And I just wonder how that psyche, what is it? You know, we all heard the stories of the trauma that citizens go through the weather elements. There was one particular story that was extremely disturbing to me.
Yeah.
The recent storm.
Yeah.
You may have heard it. I don't know if it got out and widespread. There was a nursing home with about 10 African American women who had to go through that storm all by themselves.
Yeah, I remember that.
Nobody came, didn't even know they were there. The attendants that should have been watching them either left alone, didn't have the wherewithal to take care of whatever you want to call it, to make sure these individuals were taken to safety. So these women were there by themselves through that storm. How horrible. Mm-hmm. How do you, and one last thing from a comment. In terms of dealing with our own stress through whatever, death, whatever, traumatic event, what do you see as the value of professional therapy?
Yeah.
And leaning? Because it seems like the people in New Orleans, they're able to lean on themselves in a certain sense maybe and go through things. I would say, as I observe what's going on here, just in general, there are a lot of angry people out here. There are a lot of people.
Wait, where's here?
I'll say DC because
I thought you meant in this room. I was like, we love everybody.
This is just the way I observe it. I
No, I
say this is
understand.
germane to Washington because
I
I talk to
understand.
people from all over, and we share stories how they observe people's behaviors over the last year or two. People getting upset when they're waiting in line to be attended for something, they get angry. And what I really notice is when people drive, I mean, people, it's horrific.
Yeah.
Your explanation and how do you?
Sure.
Your thoughts?
Well, to address like thanks for sharing. Part of me thinks New Orleans people are so friendly because of these practices. Like I also, I'm a white Jewish woman and also have always, since I was like a kid, been really, really interested in race in this country. And New Orleans is the only place I've lived where it is just being constantly wrestled with in like a very on the surface, like Congo Square, monuments, like it's a constant conversation. And then on top of that, ancient traditions. So there's a joy that is cultivated there that I think, the reason I mention it is that I do think it's medicine. And so there's a community, it's not that people go through I don't think anyone in New Orleans goes through anything alone. Even those women, like, they probably banded together, they probably have ancient rituals, and there's a sense of the power of community as a medicine practice. And then the page, after the page I read just now, was all about psychiatry, psychoanalysis, what are the other things, like craniosacral therapy, all the different somatic healing, trauma therapy, and I'm really a big proponent of all those things, and I love it. The only thing I wanted also for this book was that it was an equalizer, because in my experience, those that have access to psychoanalysis need to be able to pay for $250 5 days a week, and the things that I'm giving in this book are free. And New Orleanians are resilient, and people say, like, don't call us resilient, but fact, that community bounces back with like joy and food and like everything because of community ritual. And so I think that there's medicine, like great medicine and ritual. And I think for me as a Jewish person, that also was my experience. And that Shiva story of finding the guy down the street, it shook me out of my own like belly button staring and forced me to engage with this world. And I think New Orleanians are friendly because they are in the world. They are dancing on the, like last Sunday, the first second line happened since COVID. And I can't tell, I got there an hour or two later, you could feel it. People were happy, they were up, they were in outfits, they were in, I mean, it's an unreal place. And so I believe in the medicine of the people, and I believe in Freud sometimes, but it's just a question of access. So if you can access it, go to therapy. If you can't access it, go to your grandma. That was it. Last one, and I think we have to slowly close. We have about 5 minutes. So we'll...
Yeah, and correct me if any of my question is poorly based or whatever, but I'm assuming that on some level writing this book is part of your grieving process. And I guess I'm wondering, sort of just being clear and like you hearing about other people's grieving process, like how after the fact, like what's this stage like for you relative to how you're feeling that your dad and like that larger sense of community, I guess?
Yeah. Well, one, I just want to address the drivers one more time. I forgot to say. I think people are angry right now. I think the world has dosed them in things they don't know how to deal with. I mean, I think we'd be better if we were trained for this. Like many of us are missing our spiritual tools, and we weren't trained. So people who are dealing with death and loss and displacement and don't have tools are going to yell at you in the drive. So one Buddhist practice would be like, have compassion for the other. I try to do that. I was in New Orleans just driving to down the street recently, and a woman just started honking at me like crazy, cut me off, and I got behind her and was just like, what just happened? And she opened the window and flicked me off with this for a really long time, and then I was just like, what? And I took a picture of her. I was like, what's going on? And then she saw me take a picture, she put the camera out, she's like, I saw what she was so angry, I don't know who she was, and she had a handicap license too. And then all of a sudden, she was just gone. Like she went I would probably say 70 miles an hour on a 30-mile-an-hour road. And I literally was like, what just happened to me? And then I realized, all I could do is I try to do this when I'm really angry, just I wonder if she's having a bad day. Trying, and it helps us love ourselves when we do that. And then in the end, I don't know, I feel very humbled by writing this book because my grief is kicking my ass all the time. And I'm not like, who's ever, none of us are fine. We're all losing it, like every single person I know. And, but I don't know, it's weird. Like I was saying, when I come home, I used to come home, my mom doesn't know this, but for the last, it's almost 2 years. On December 1st, it'll be 2 years since my dad died. And I would say for the first year, he died in the house. Whenever I came home, I wouldn't look at anyone. I would run to the room where he died, slam the door, sit down, and just sob every time. And the last time I came home, I was like, I didn't feel like going in there at all. It was like he moved from the room to within me. And so things change, but the thing about this is that it's just our lives. I think that I always feel really special when someone's like, what's going on? Like, when my dad died. And I'm like, it's almost like my sleeves become these puffy things, right? Like my dad died. But death is just life. And so when we can find a way to integrate it into our lives, that's the medicine. And I believe in all I believe in is living and finding a way to be alive fully. And so grieving is part of living. And if we don't grieve, we fight. And I don't want people to fight. So we gotta grieve. And I think that's a good place to end. So
Can I ask one more thing?
yes.
I want to ask about your mom. Did she get involved in the book? Did she do any editing for you? I know she's
No.
a writer. She's one person.
No, so when I wouldn't let, I have a lot of friends. So the end of the book, it's a weird acknowledgments. I didn't put last names, just 40 names. But she was involved with supporting me, but I wouldn't tell her what I was doing. Because right when I told my family I was writing this book, they all were like, what are you putting in? And I was like, none of you are going to be involved in this process. But I let her read it. It's an act of love, so I didn't throw anyone under the bus in this book. But
read one chapter, every chapter.
Oh, yeah.
Martha's Vineyard. Every day she would read a chapter.
we had a 2-week period together where I read her a chapter a day. We read the whole book.
This was after the book was published?
Yeah.
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 So you didn't read it to her before?
No.
No. I wouldn't let anyone. I wouldn't know family.
We're all afraid she was going to
Yeah. I was very generous. I cut all of our fights out of the book. So I just want to say real quick, Thank you to Andy, thank you to the Busboys and Poets team for hosting. There's cake in the back for all of you. You can just grab a slice. And this was such an honor, and you were an incredible crowd. I'm grateful to those of you that are reading it, and I just encourage you to read it, get it for your friends who you think. The new thing I'm realizing is if you need someone to support you, ask them to read the book and then have lunch, because it gives the tools to this. Well, it's really important to have the tools to help each other, and I think some of those are in the book. So thank you. It's been an honor, and good night.
All right, let's give it up one more time, because that was good. All right, so I just wanted to thank all of you for coming out tonight. I wanted to thank our live stream folks for joining us. And honestly, right now, I think this is a book that is so timely, especially now during COVID, that everyone's upset, everyone's angry, and we're all looking for some form of self-care. And I think some folks have definitely found it with Forget Prayer and Spring Break. So, all right, folks, thank you all so much. Have a lovely evening, and there's cake. Go ahead on back. And books.
Yes.
There are books, and we'll be signing them. Oh, I will, Marissa.
And buy the book here, and buy it for a friend too, not just one. Buy a couple books if you can, and don't go to Amazon to buy it.
You can go to Amazon.
Oh.